Hello, everyone. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is March 10, year 2022, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I welcome you all here today for a incredible show, I believe. We're gonna now don't tune out. We're not gonna just run that tape that we had, that incredible interview with Kirby Sommers. And by the way, before I even start, I want to thank the author Kirby Sommers for spending so much time on this incredible deep dive that she's been doing in concert with her ongoing research. And I really appreciate it because I know how hard she works. Her time is very, very precious. And I don't want to forget, last week was incredible. I hope it was for you as well. I was very excited about it. Um, Manny Grossman, yeah, wow. He has uncovered, I mean, literally uncovered some incredible new information as it regards the Son of Sam, so-called Son of Sam, because we know that the case has been mislabeled inadvertently, perhaps purposely. That remains to be seen. But the point is, I want to thank Manny Grossman for giving us these updates of his incredible research. So between the two of them, and hopefully they'll meet at some point. Between the two of them, my mind has just been spinning, and it's full of spin-offs as well, which I want to spend some time today to share with you what's going to be coming down the pike for you, the audience, the viewer. And the audience is growing incrementally. Thank you very much, Kirby Sommers, Manny Grossman, for helping me grow the audience as well. And the Patreon group is also cruising along there. It's moving upward and onward. That's a good sign. At least it's not shrinking, which I don't expect it to do. It's only going to grow. All right. So, I, as I stated at the outset, I just didn't want to replay this interview that Kirby Sommers has on her YouTube channel. If you want to watch it, and many of you already have, that's one of the reasons why I didn't want to do this. So, but if you do want an archive of it, go to her channel and watch that from beginning to end. It's about 2.5 hours long. I'm only going to show part of it today because I wanted to spend the first time of this session here, this 60 minutes that I spend with you twice a week, giving you a preview of coming attractions, and also to summarize, at least for my purposes, what I've learned over the past couple of sessions with Kirby Sommers and Manny Grossman. And this will also enhance the citizen journalism movement. I think it's a bona fide movement by now. It's not just a one-off. There's, as shown by the people who here in the live chat who watch this channel, as well as a range of channels. But we have taken it upon ourselves, we, the people, to do this work, right? Whether it's bringing reparative justice to the world, right? Or whether it is to do research that other people who we've been depending on, like people in education, to do it for us and to package it for us. Food, right? I was doing a whole study on Chick-fil-A and Long John Silver. There's a whole channel on that. And they have a lot of subscribers. And I realized that even such an intimate process of eating, of cooking, has been corporatized, been taken over, right? So we, for at least two generations, I think it started with my generation, the boomers, and as part of this all social, cultural, political, economic engineering, by the way, that we're seeing, and we're reaching the end point of it, which I want to speak to in a moment. But you can point to almost everything: law enforcement, taking care of our own communities, our own homes, raising the children, educating them, and just doing life as it's been done traditionally for millennia, cross culturally. You don't have to look outside out outside off planet. You can see it around the world, and all this, is it seven? All the seven continents. You will see people taking care of business. But that changed because, as you know by now, there has been this concerted process of incorporating the seven continents, all the peoples of the world, synthesizing him into one post-human future, right? I don't need to talk about Klaus Schwab. Most of you are well acquainted by now with the so-called Great Reset, almost ad nauseum. So I don't like to spend a lot of time. That I'll leave it to Dan Bongino and these other characters who've been promoted up there to suck the energy away from the really, really groundbreaking research and writing that's being done by people like Kirby Sommers and Manny Grossman, right? And there are others as well, but they're just in my immediate focus right now. So first of all, thank you very much to those two writers. I also want to give another thanks to the new as well as the continuing Patreon sponsors. And then the last session, I got a couple of, I'm not begging right now here for you. I'm not beyond it, but I got live chats. And I'm saying that because I was surprised that it's the first time it's ever happened. I didn't even know I was eligible for live chats. That used to be more of a feature of YouTube in days old. I don't see that often as much anymore. Maybe maybe the market is saturated. I don't really know. But thank you for that. I appreciate every single and watching, just watching and sharing this material and subscribing. It's so important. And I'll tell you why subscriptions are important, not just because I want to be Mr. Popularity, although that wouldn't be bad. But when I go and approach people who don't know me from Adam or don't know my work or could care less, if I approach authors that I'm interested, such as Sean Levy, I think he does great work. He didn't even respond to my query. I wanted to have him on the show. And I give links to my channel. It's probably because, 8,000 subscribers? My gosh, he's going to save his energy for someone who's doing, 40,000, 50,000, right? And these are people who typically, and I've surveyed the competition, who probably couldn't hold a candle to my own analysis and the type of conversations that I enjoy with an incredibly wide range of people. But they go by the numbers, I think. So the more subscribers I have, the more just superficial, yes, I'll spend the time. And I don't blame any of the authors who, think twice about going with someone who's in the 8,000 category. I want to get to the 10,000. I want to build it to 50,000. Eventually, I want to build it to 500,000, maybe beyond. And then I'll deplatform YouTube. No, I'll maintain it. It's a good medium. I like it. I enjoy it. Never in my wildest imagination that I ever dreamed that I would be hosting the equivalent to my own television show. Yes, that used to be just for specialists, people who had access to multi-million-dollar studios and writers and lighting and technicians and unions. So we're doing this, and I value it. I don't take it for granted. Thank you, YouTube, for making it possible. I don't always agree with your decisions, but so far as I'm concerned, I'm going to be using this platform to to its greatest potential. So let me talk about, now that the thanks have been executed here, let me talk about some coming attractions, because it all articulates with what I've been doing for the last year and 2 months and what I will be moving into in the future. I'm revisiting because I'm a true crime person, more than a buff, I write about it as well. But I'm a true crime individual of long standing. And one of the early books that I read, not early books, one of the earlier books, I don't know, it's been over 10 years now, was a book that really stuck in my mind. I can't remember the name of the author, but it's called Yosemite Killer. And it is the case of Cary Stayner, who was identified as, he was a handyman at a lodge in Yosemite Park. It's well known in California, maybe nationally, it's very well known, Yosemite National Park. And he was a handyman there who abducted a woman and her daughter, her teenage daughter, and her daughter's friend. She was visiting, I think, an exchange student from, I think, Italy or another country. And anyway, I'm not going to tell you about the whole case there, but I'm revisiting it. And thanks to the generosity of the Patreon people, I've acquired because it's not available elsewhere. I had to go online and find this. It's a 2-disc set. It was a television film. It was called I Know My Name is Stephen. And see when, yeah, it was produced in 1989 because Cary Stayner, and I'm not making excuses for him. He was convicted, and I think he's still on death row in San Quentin. I'm not making excuses for him, but his younger brother had been abducted and was held captive for about, I think it's 6 years or so. I'll have to get the exact date, so don't ding me on that in the comment section. But for many many years, his younger brother Stephen Stainer, he had forgotten his last name. That's why I know my first name is Steve, because he had blotted it out. So it's a curious case, and the reason why I'm revisiting now, because when I was first reading this book about the Yosemite killer, I didn't understand the extent to which human trafficking was in place, and now all of us know that it's a huge problem. It's endemic to our society, unfortunately. And moreover, we know that human trafficking is also integrated into our rulings, our political class, certain elements of it, not all of them. And trafficking, along with human trafficking, sex trafficking, arms trafficking, illicit exchanges of all sort. We know more about it now, so I thought it was appropriate to revisit the Cary Stayner Yosemite case, killing case, in light of a new framework. And I'm mentioning that here is because this research that, for example, Manny Grossman is doing is decades old. But by using the new technology like YouTube, like citizen journalism, like the handheld cameras and all of that, in addition to using the canonical literature of true crime, such as, right, Maury Terry's book, right, we are coming to new levels and of understanding and more nuanced realization of what these seemingly random one-off crimes, what they really represent. And I'll talk about Manny's methodology in a moment, because I think it's not only is the topic itself inherently interesting and spectacular, some might say sensationalistic, but in a larger sense, he is helping to revolutionize this, what I don't call it this, I didn't come up with the term, citizen journalism, right? We're not going to leave it to mainstream media. We're not going to leave it to CNN or HBO documentaries, who do a good job. I've mentioned them on many occasions, how really excellent most of their documentaries are. I don't know about the other content, but certainly their documentaries are first rate. So we're going to do I Know My First Name is Stephen, revisiting the Yosemite Killer. I'm going to be visiting Hot Springs, Arkansas. I'm learning about the Irish-American gangster Oni Madden, who was a big timer in New York City. And I won't go into the reasons why he migrated to Hot Springs, Arkansas. And this is an excellent book by David Hill. I started reading it this morning. I couldn't stop. So I'm going to share some of the insights here, not just repeating the book, but trying to explain what contributions like this means to understanding the New World Order of today, of 2022, right? This is probably not what David Hill was intending, but that really, Ira Levin didn't suspect that decades after he wrote A Kiss Before Dying, which was published the year that I was born, it's that old, that Kirby Sommers would be probing into his life, right? And myself as well, and sharing with you. And I think someone else is going to come along and say, hey, I'm going to write a critical biography of Ira Levin. There's more to it than we had really expected. So The Vapors is an incredible social history, I would call it. He's not a historian by training, but I consider it a social history, a sociocultural history of one of the biggest gambling empires that most people never heard about. They know about Las Vegas and Atlantic City, but Hot Springs, Arkansas, this is probably the first one in the country. It goes back to the late 19th century, 1870s, and horse racing, gambling, prostitution, liquor, you name it. All the human vices represented in Hot Springs. Okay, that's the backstory. How does it relate to what's going on now? Well, you might remember that none other than William Jefferson Clinton had roots in Hot Springs, Arkansas. That's where the dream of the presidency and the New World Order and being a Rockefeller asset and the CIA operative rat snitch when he was doing his Rhodes Scholarship, right, in Britain, which he never showed up. It's kind of like the guy that we call Barack Hussein Obama. He was a no-show at Columbia University as well. So we're taking it back to Hot Springs. That's why I'm reading it. And I haven't got there yet, but I'm sure the author Hill will talk a little bit about the Clintons, right? And I won't hold the book up. I will, and I'm telling you this because I want to apologize for saying that I was going to talk about V.C. Andrews. That was put on the back shelf because I want to talk to Manny Grossman and Kirby Sommers first with their fast-breaking news. So I hope you'll forgive me that I'll get to the V.C. Andrews. I haven't even read it yet, but I'm really excited about it. It's called The Woman Beyond the Attic, published very recently, 2022. It's the biography of V.C. Andrews, who I talked about months and months ago, probably a year. It's one of the first shows that I ever did. And it yielded, again, it surprised me. It yielded a lot of information by just revisiting it and looking at her work through a different lens. So I'll get to that. I just got this book yesterday. It's called Framed in Monte Carlo, another new publication, 2021, I believe. And it's called Framed in Monte Carlo, about one of the guys that was convicted. He was the bodyguard of Edmund Safra, multimillionaire international figure, who, by the way, had some dealings with the Clinton people, who was burned to death in Monte Carlo, right, under suspicious circumstances. And they framed this guy, according to him. I have to read the book. I have a feeling I'll probably agree with his claim that he was framed. But this is the Edmund Safra immolation case that we're going to deal with. And again, it's very much related to the current goings on here with the Great Reset. It's all structurally related. And that's what I like about both Manny's work and Kirby Sommers' work, is that it's looking at specifics, but it's also taking that 8 miles high view downward and seeing how it all works together in a systemic fashion that connects the history going back decades, in certain cases going back millennia, which I'll talk about in a moment. And in fact, I'll go to it right now. I'll be reviewing this book, which is a new acquisition thanks to the Patreon sponsors. One of my favorite authors, Leo Zagami, and this is volume 7 of his Confessions of an Illuminati, and I think I have all 7 of them. And the reason I'm interested in this is because he does talk about the possibility of alien entities or intelligences that might be behind the current end game towards the AI post-human world. He alludes to it, and he refers to certain literature and other experts in AI, electrical engineering, computing science, theoreticians, who are making this claim, whether it's out of alarm or they're trying to push us toward it. Well, it varies depending on who we're talking about here, but he's addressing this. And I'm interested in it because in conversation with Kirby Sommers, we had a brief mention about the Rh negative blood type, and I started getting interested in it a few years ago, reading the book by Nick Redfern. I can't remember the title of it exactly. In fact, I think I have an excerpt that I'll post on the Patreon so people can read the chapter that most interested me. So I'm starting to revisit that topic as well. This one here, it has some promise, but it also has some weaknesses that I can see. That she's got an agenda. Um, and it's called DNA of the Gods, the Anunnaki creation of Eve, the alien battle for humanity. And this is again this notion that alien DNA has been seeded into the human population. This might be really what we're dealing with the constant barrage of problems that we all know they're engineered now, including perhaps world war in the Russia-Ukraine region of the world, right? Which is not going to be contained there if it does happen. Hopefully that'll be resolved sooner than later. And I'm going to talk about the fear factor, right? That was the name of the program, the engineering of fear, in a moment. Because I see a lot of it gone, it's disappeared. It hasn't disappeared, but it's not as intense that we've seen in times past, because we've learned some lessons over the past 2 years about how these events are orchestrated, how they are engineered. Excuse me. Pardon me. There's a lot of dust in the air. It's the change of season. There's a lot of wind blowing here, and I think some of it's coming in through the door. Although I shut it, and I have the air filter. I turned it off because I don't want the interference. How's the mic? Is it better today? Someone scolded me for having the mic too far away, so I moved a little bit closer. I was getting too much plosives or pops and overdriving the computer or the microphone before. That's why I pushed it away, but I moved a little bit closer to myself. So now that I'm through with my coughing fit, we had this brief allusion. It wasn't even a discussion about Rh and negative blood type, and I am going to start looking at it again because I have been wanting to do a complete talk on one of my, I won't say it's a favorite group, but they've always had my interest from the time they came out. And I never really got around to it here and talking about them at length. And I think now's an appropriate time. And the group that I am cryptically alluding to is called Devo, D-E-V-O, that come out of, I believe, well, some members come out of Cleveland, but a couple of the members, in fact, most of the band met at Kent State. You remember Kent State from the atrocities there. The National Guard shot and killed students, as well as some people that were visiting the campus and wounded them. That's where they're from, the art students. And there's a book fairly recent called Recombo DNA. And they were talking about this early days of the Devo career. In fact, Devo is short for devolution. So I'm trying to figure out if Mark Mothersbaugh and Jerry Casale had some sort of inside information on this that goes beyond them just being art students. Maybe they were brought in, I don't know, subsidized. We'll see. There's a reason why the 60s, only the counterculture, only the Laurel Canyon people are being hammered by the same people who show up in my comment section, the commentariat, right? Because they read one book on it and they think that everybody that came out of the 60s and nobody else is is corrupted in some fashion, right? Anyway, that's enough about them. So one of the points I wanted to make before going into the Kirby Sommers interview in a moment, I'm running longer than I thought I would, but that's okay because I can come back to it the next time. One of the main contributions that Manny Grossman makes to this ongoing opening up of research, it's no longer just the province of people who are on staff of newspapers, right? Like Maury Terry, he was a newspaper man, which is good, or professional journalists, or people who get grants from think tanks who can do this work. We can do this work, and we will do this work, and we are doing the work, right? But it's a concept of local knowledge. Jot that one down, local knowledge, because Manny refers to the urban legend, right? And I think that like conspiracy theory, I think the term urban legend was put out there to kind of minimize the importance of collective communal memory, such that is embodied in the woman that we know as Byrne as part of Manny Grossman's investigation. She had that local knowledge, that ingrained memory of a cross that had been carved into a tree. She had heard about it. And that's where, this term, this phrase urban legend, but urban legend connotes something that's untrue. It's just something, some sort of monster story that kind of lurks around. So we can't really take it seriously. And when someone says, "Oh, that's an urban legend," we automatically tune out. And that's a mistake. We don't want to do that. So if we call it local knowledge, which is what, by the way, what anthropologists call it, this is straight out of Anthropology 100, right? Methodology. How do you find information about alien, that is non-investigator cultures? How do you go to the Trobriand islands and make sense of what they are doing? Well, you use local knowledge, right? This is what Carlton, and this is not a good example because Carlton Gajusek was a pervert, and Manny Grossman dug him out, and now I'm very much interested in him because he was ostensibly a anthropologist doing this type of work. And as we know from our conversations, Manny and myself, a lot of these anthropologists work for intelligence agencies, because intelligence, and we know about what's her name, MacArthur McNee or McNally, I forgot her name. I'm mispronouncing it probably purposely, who uses anthropological knowledge in order to help conquer different groups on behalf of NATO and the United Nations, right? So we could use that. We could use the tools of the ostensible masters, because they're not the masters, we are the masters. We can use their tools in order to advance our research knowledge agenda so that we'll understand better what they're up to, and we can either forestall it or turn it around. Right? Any progress we make in slowing them down is a win, as the saying goes in guerrilla warfare, which comes right out of the Vietnam experience, when a guerrilla war really won the day, right? The people mobilized amongst themselves. The saying there was, and this is from General Avo Giap in Vietnam. And when I was in Da Nang for over a month, there's a whole big boulevard named after General Avo Giap, Giap. But he's General Avo Giap. And by the way, I'm not saying that I'm a sympathizer, but I respect him as a general. By the way, he started out as a history teacher. Then he studied the Chinese military classics. You hear about Sun Tzu and all that. The literature is far more extensive than these people who read The Art of War and say, "Yeah, I know all about Chinese martial arts." And the same way with Japanese martial art. That's why I always, whenever I have the chance, ridicule the world's oldest teenager and fanboy, Quentin Tarantino. But General Giap said, in guerrilla war, if you're not losing, you're winning. All right. You got that? So long as we're not losing, we are winning. And I know we're used to NBA, MLB, NFL, all the initial sports, that there has to be a winner at the end, right? There has to be a loser and there has to be a winner. But life is more complex than that. Let's get out of that framework. That's why, you read in these comments, all this impatience. Oh, we got to bring these people to justice. Why aren't they in jail? Lock them up and all that. I mean, yeah, we'd all like to see that. But in the interim, if we're not losing, we are winning. And we can win by slowing them down, by having they themselves consider their own history. Because this is what I learned from a well-known, a famous writer by the name of Gay Talese, who wrote about the mafia. He's Italian-American himself. His father was a tailor who made custom suits, right? Bespoke suits, as they're called in England. So Gay Tillet's dresses along those lines. By the way, a lot of middle class men used to dress like that. This is before the off the rack revolution, right? Um, but he said the reason why that he's allowed, I think was Gately's. Maybe I'm thinking of Nicholas Pileggi, another Italian American. Maybe it was Nicholas Pileggi who wrote Wise Guys, right? I think it was him. Sorry for confusing him, because he writes more on the mafia, quote unquote mafia topics. People ask him, well, how come the mafia people allow you to live? I mean, you're writing about their innermost workings and their psychology and their capers and all of it. And he says, they really appreciate writers because they themselves don't have any outside objective 8 mile high understanding of who they are, where they come. In other words, they don't even know their own history. They don't know their own culture. They just think they're doing these capers, but they don't understand that they're related to a multi-generational tradition that goes back to the old country. And they don't know how to articulate with the mainstream political and economic system. They don't know that Frank Costello was dealing with top level government people. They don't know that. And so they can take a certain pride. They're no longer just street gangsters or thugs fencing goods that quote unquote fell off the back of a truck. They are now men of honor who are part of the fabric of American social, cultural, political, economic history. And that's how I understand them. That's how I come to respect them. And that's how I'll go further than that. That's how I have come to my faith that there's these men of honor, right? These men of traditional honor are the ones who are going to bring America back to the reparative justice and society that we are hoping for. It's not going to be the courts, right? The usual suspects. No, it's going to be these people who are on the fringes, who are on the marginal ends, who are going to say, enough is enough. We do not want our women and children destroyed and killed and molested and our men to be hormonally refigured and re-engineered. Enough is enough. It's not going to come from academia, not going to come from the courts. It's not going to come from the media. It's going to come from the men of honor, the old school people, right? So that's why I'm okay with them. So anyway, that's kind of a long way of explaining why people like Gay Talese or Nicholas Pileggi or Selwyn Rabb, all these great, I won't even call them true crime writers, just call them writers, because there's incredible contributors. And this is the group that I would like to be associated with someday. I'm doing my part by doing the YouTube gig, right? But I understand it in that setting. So you know what? Ironically, people who do this type of work are the most protected, because do you think that Anthony Fauci has any awareness of where he stands in the lineage, or some of the lower level functionaries, soldiers, let's call them? They don't really understand that. They're only looking at it from their own. It's like a cell, CELL, right? Like a communist cell. It's all compartmentalized. So they don't really have so they kind of appreciate people looking at them in an objective fashion. And I think this is how Mr. Hill, I forgot his first name, who did this social history of Hot Springs, Arkansas. He talks about it in the beginning. I always read their methods at the beginning and the thank yous and acknowledgments. He says a lot of people would talk to him and explain what was going on in Hot Springs. Many of them are still alive, but they didn't want their names out there. But they respected what Mr. Hill was doing, right? And what is in reading the book, I'm sure they're, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was part of this incredible tapestry, this social history that helped form America, for better and for worse. All right. Anyway, this helps explain what I'm doing, and I'm not trying to put words in Manny Grossman's mouth or Kirby Sommers' work. That's just how I view their contribution, their local knowledge. Kirby Sommers is a lifelong New York City resident, and she was a real estate professional, so she can give us not just a superficial description of these historic landmark buildings like the Dakota. She live that experience. I mean, that's local knowledge that she has ingrained in her and she's sharing with us, which is invaluable. Same with Manny Grossman. He is a homeboy. Now, he's from the North Bronx and his area is in the Yonkers, but man, I've learned so much beyond Manhattan, right? New York City, and in the whole tri-state area is much more vast and interesting than we are led to believe. You know, Untermeyer Park. Oh my God, there's a whole microcosm there in Untermeyer Park that we're learning about. So that is the value of local knowledge. Okay, now here's my pitch for academic knowledge. Don't tune out. Hear me out, right? You got your local knowledge, but in the most recent talk between Craig Fitzgerald and Manny Grossman, they were talking about, and I had Samuel Untermeyer pegged for a Sabbatine Frankist from the get-go because I was reading about Dr. George Hodel, the person who's supposedly the Black Dahlia uh, murderer, which I think he is, the series of books written by his own son. Uh, Based on my reading, I said he's a Sabbatean Frankist, and it turns out that he most likely he was. So here's where the academic pitch comes in. Yeah, I only could come to these conclusions and put it together by reading books by scholars, such as by Professor David Halperin. Right. This is a book about Zabbatai Zeb. This is not just YouTube stuff. This is just not something that Jay Dyer spouts out, name checks on InfoWars. That stuff is like third, fourth. It's been so sifted through and denatured by the time it reaches YouTube or these sites, these people who claim that I'm not an expert, but I read the scholarly literature on it. And this is from a library. It's called the Littman Library of Jewish Civilization. So there are a community of Jewish scholars who study this and devote money into it and recognize that there was a character called Zabbatai Zev, right? Frankist, Sabbatine Frankist, right? So you read that and you see the social history of where he comes from. And by the way, if you read about Zabbatai Zev, you also understand about the war in the Ukraine, right? Or Ukraine, not the. You learn about the war in Ukraine. You can understand what the backstory and what's at stake here. Because I believe, and I'm not using cliche that's a spiritual war. I'm going to say there's a metaphysical component in the conflict right now that's not really being addressed. I'm not saying I'm going to do it. I'm qualified to it, but I know that it's not being addressed. Just another couple more books combining the local knowledge, right? The informal, the folk wisdom, right? The wisdom, listen to the wisdom of the folks, the old people, right? The muttering people, the crazy person in the attic, right? Like VC. Those are the people that will teach you. They'll take you to school. So here's another one. It's called Dark Mirrors. Andrei A. Orlov. The subtitle is Azazel, I'm not pronouncing it right, Azazel and Sataniel in Early Jewish Demonology. It's an academic book, State University Press, right? It's tough going, ladies and gentlemen. It's tough going. You have to be a specialist in this, but I can pick up parts of it and understand it, right? That was my living, that was my career for 40 years or so. And then finally, we have the Sabbatean heresy. So all the people that were ours, oh man, you're being anti-Semitic and blah, blah, blah. Listen, man, this comes from another library. It's called the Brandeis Library of Modern Jewish Thought. So blame the Brandeis, blame this Professor Pavel, I'm mispronouncing Machigo, right? And the title of this collection is the Sub Collection. That means they're scholars, who write articles about the Sabbatean heresy specifically, subtitled Writings on Mysticism, Messianism, and the Origins of Jewish Modernity. So there's a whole back deal here. And this hopefully will help the commentariat understand that, don't come at me with, oh, you got to read Robert Sephar, 1666. Come on, give me a break. right? I shouldn't be angry about that. These guys are, I guess, entitled to make a living, but the problem is that people who are just tourists here can lump me in with those clowns, and I'm far. I'm not saying I'm better. I'm far more nuanced and in depth than these individuals, not because out of pride, because I wanted to take it to its logical conclusion. If these streams of thought and people abide by these traditions are in power today, we've got our work cut out for us. And if we don't recognize it, we'll never be able even to get reparative justice. The cycle will keep repeating and repeating and repeating until we understand where this is coming from, these energies. Some say satanic, Satanael, I guess it's represented or translated in the Tanakh, or as we call it, the Old Testament, right? Okay, moving on. Local knowledge, that's where it's at. Now, you saw in the YouTube section here the pic, which I just found today as I was posting it and getting the program of today scheduled. And I said, "Oh my gosh, this is such a treasure. I like it. There's so much serendipity or chance or seemingly nothing is random, I guess, but there's serendipity involved." And I found this picture, and in one photo, the one on the YouTube thumbnail, the pic there, you got left to right, you got Ira Levin. Some of you probably recognize him. He's the author of Rosemary's Baby, Sliver, The Boys from Brazil, and what yeah, any number of other books, right? Ira Levin. And then the guy on the far right, you probably recognize as the infamous Roman Polanski, who adapted the book Rosemary's Baby, published in 67. The following year, 68, Roman Polanski comes up with the movie adaptation, which, as we talk about in the conversation with Kirby Sommers here, probably means that they were collaborating and it was a package deal. It was conceived as a 1-2 punch, first a novel and then movie right away. Why the timing? Well, that's a question for the person in the middle of the photograph who you probably don't recognize. I recognize them because I know one of you made fun of me for claiming that I'm a film expert. I'm not a film expert in everything, but I do know my basic film history. I taught at UCLA School of Film and Television and Theater for 1 year before they kicked me out. They didn't really kick me out, but I just like to put it in that, just to kind of rub their nose in the fact that they really missed out. They got rid of me. Of course, I might not have survived there because my scholarship, my work, my teaching is way, way out there. It's way cutting edge. I'm surprised I was able to last at UC Davis so long. I guess because they thought I was a joke and they didn't really take me seriously because they were raised on Mr. Miyagi movies, or they thought that Japanese people were the ones that they saw in the Mr. Moto films, and all, they have meaning, they have significance, they stick with people even though they claim to be multiculturally sensitive, right? And I'll get to that in a moment, because when we talk about the third person, William Castle, he was responsible for embedding a certain type of mindset. They talk about racial stereotypes and gender stereotypes in film and television and all that. But what about ideological content that was being put in there? So when I found this photograph, I said, "Oh yeah, William Castle. He was that B movie, B as in letter B, movie producer. He did low budget movies, right, on the cheap." But what were those B movies? They were horror movies, scary monster movies. That's William Castle. By the way, he was born in 1914. He was born William Schloss. And those of you who know your German, Schloss means castle, right? So his professional name was William Castle. He's playing these word games. If you know German, I know a little bit. And I've been to Schloss or Schlossen in Germany, including ones in Heidelberg, and talk about Gothic, right? So, and that's his birth name. But he did these B movies, by the way. The A movie was the high budget with all the stars, and the B, they'd have these double features to bring people into the movie house. And that would be a cheaper budget one. Those are called the B movies, lower budget stars that were kind of on their way down, like drug addicts, like Bela Lugosi. And by the way, William Castle. I'll get to what his contribution here in a moment. I swear. And it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to get to the clip here, but I think this talk is very important to try to contextualize what's been going on in this research stream for the past week with Kirby Sommers and Manny Grossman. But William Castle himself was influenced. He was inspired by seeing none other than Bela Lugosi on stage portraying Dracula. And of course, if you want to go back to Bram Stoker, even beyond Dracula, there's a whole social history there as well. I'm not going to get into it right now. And by the way, there's an incredible treasury of academic literature on it there. And that's just in the English language. Just imagine what it's like in German or Hungarian and Eastern European languages, maybe Russian. There's some material there that needs to be translated about that whole bloodline right there that entered into the popular culture. Again, the popular culture rears its ugly head into the present. So that's William Castle, who was inspired at age 13 by seeing the famous Dracula. He's usually associated Christopher Lee to some extent, right? But it's typically Bela Lugosi that people think about when they refer to the cinema representation of Count Dracula. So very briefly, William Castle went to work in the 1940s. He started out as like a showman, sort of like a carnival circus barker almost. That's how movies started, by the way. It only became red carpet and tuxedos decades later. It was just seen as a disreputable industry. It wasn't even an industry, a business for a bunch of immigrants, from Central Europe who could barely speak English, right? Joseph P. Kennedy disparagingly referred to them as a bunch of pants pressers, right? They were like laundrymen who were like moguls and owning these studios, like Harry Cohn, by the way, Harry S. Cohn. Anyway, he went to work for him after being spotted for his talent in public relations and gimmicks and whatnot. And unfortunately, that since then, film scholars themselves have viewed William Castle, the producer, even though he produced Rosemary's Baby, which was the highest budget film in his career, from what I understand. I'll have to read the books. There's a lot of scholarship on William Castle, as you imagine. I'll have to read that to see his full filmography. But I think it was Rosemary's Baby that was the pinnacle of a long career doing cheapo movies. But as a result, most of the scholarship I read so far dismiss him as just a guy who was involved with gimmicks, horror for horror's sake, scary movies, because that's what sold tickets. Okay, this is where the Professor Hamamoto analysis comes in to play here. Okay, after he left Columbia Pictures, he became an independent producer. Okay, question number one: films are expensive to make. Who supplied the money? If I was writing a book, an article, something critical about Harry Cohn and his seminal influence in creating a whole 2 or 3 or 4, down to the present, right? The slasher movies, all of it, Clown, the Clown. You'd have to look at William Castle as being one of the founding fathers of a whole succession of films that have terrified children and adolescents continuously since that time. Who supplied that money? I bet it was the same agencies that were supplying money for terroristic events, both here and overseas. We'll have to check that out, huh? It might be the same people who are funding the perverted sexology experiments of professor over at the University of Illinois, Kinsey, right? Alfred Kinsey. It's probably the same people that were funding these twin studies of Dr. Neubauer, right? We talked about the film Three Perfect Triplets, right? Something along those lines, how they were doing these twins and triplet studies. So they were doling out the money right across the board. And we know that the film business is pretty much in the hands of the behavioral psychologists. People say, "Oh, it's a check-on." No, 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 no. It's part of NATO, United Nations, and they hand out franchises to certain different groups and all that. But it's New World Order material. So, as an independent producer, I would say that beginning in the 50s, and those of you who are of my generation, the boomers, well, you don't know his name, William Castle, but you know his promotions, you know his films, right? For example, he uses one film where he's taken out $1 million worth of insurance for one of the movies he's showing at the screen. So if anybody dies of a heart attack, they're they will be taken care of. They will be given a proper burial because they've been insured. It's a gimmick, right? Remember, he's like a carnival type person, a barker, a hustler who goes back to the early days of cinema, the Nickelodeon, a barker, right? Carnival man. He's also one of the people that brought in 3D glasses. And again, this is why the film historians view him as not being a serious player. Oh, 3D was just a fad, you know. Three dimensionals. Who would ever think about developing glasses that will allow us that would provide the illusion of three dimension and of a different reality? Well, ladies and gentlemen, Oculus Rift didn't really take off for the first time, but we haven't seen the last of those glasses. Now they have contacts. Maybe they'll just be implanted directly into the retina. I don't know. And I'm not saying that William Castle knew this, but I think there was more to him than we give him credit for. So remember that name, William Castle. Dig deep into him, just like you're digging into Jim Henson and the Muppets, the Sherry Lewis Show, Kukla, Fran and Ollie, Mr. Rogers. All these people are doing supposed children's shows in the 1950s. They were giving you the fuzzy puppet shows during the 1950s. And then when you got to a certain age, 10, 11, 12, especially when you're a teenager, they turn you over to William Castle to scare the bejesus out of you, right? So as an independent producer, his skill, and he transferred it to Ira Levin and to Roman Polanski. They're all part of the package now. These gentlemen were involved in what I call the commodification of fear, right? The monetization of fear. Before, you had to get it from your grandma or some crazy uncle living in the attic about these scary ghost stories, right? You get them kind of random. But now you could roll these out society wide, and kids from the Northeast to the Southwest, North, South, East, West of America will have the same lore, Dracula of fear, the fear factor, right? The same adrenaline rush are going to be common to all people of that baby boomer and onward generation, the same point of reference. So when they roll out mass programs of therapy, let's say psychotherapy, whatever it might be, ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, you name it, it'll already be prepackaged like a Happy Meal. It'll be like a McDonald's Happy Meal, one low price for everything, for everybody. One site, whether you're in Bemidji, Minnesota, or Sacramento, California, it's going to be the same Big Mac. It's the Big Mac commodification of pleasure, of fun, again, using insane clowns like Ronald McDonald. But in this case, we're commodifying, we're packaging, or monetizing fear, universal fear. Okay, and then as you know, within our lifetime, within recent years, the movie industry moved from the public spaces. It moved into the home, right, in television. And the old movies became the content of television, as I told you before, right? Tarzan movies, I saw them. Those are my parents' generation movies, but I grew up on them because they became the content of TV. And then more recently, we have them in the online so-called streaming, right? The whole Netflix phenomenon with a little iPhone, smartphone, done phone. And this is all part of that larger process of control that gets closer and closer and tighter as we move into this end game of the post-human world, right? You have to be fearful. And as I said at the top of this talk. That approach seems to be failing now because people aren't really panicking when they're talking about the Ukraine-Russia war there, right? As we're being treated to. Some people are falling for it. Yeah, that Putin's a devil, or they're saying Putin's a good guy, right? It's the same won-loss mentality that has been inculcated into us by MLB, NFL, NBA, the win or lose mentality of sports rather than the real life adult world of ambiguity and mixed warfare and battles and mixed results, let's call it, right? So today we have the big tech, right? They studied the films of Mr. Castle, right? They research it. They study the occult traditions. They read this literature that talks about Zabbatai Zev and the Sabbatine Frankus. And what do? They put the electrical engineers figure out programs on how to put it into us on a cognitive level, right? These are your cognitive psychologists or behavioral scientists that are taking all this popular culture and having measured it and studied it and written about it and discussed it amongst themselves, say, okay, great, we'll take the part that'll put the human population into the most vulnerable position of subservience and passivity and slavery so that we can control them up into the point where they're no longer human. And that seems to be failing. Now, don't get lax, don't let down. We're not done yet with that process, right? And by the way, in me speaking of it like this, and if they're watching, and I'm sure they are, right? The monitors, because isn't that what YouTube is? It's a monitoring device. It also helps them understand that we are aware and we're fully prepared for what you're ready to throw at us, and we're going to come back. We're going to come back at you with our own organic culture and civilization. So join us, right? Don't try to enslave us. Join us. We are the sentient human beings that human society was meant to be. Okay. So I'm sorry I never got to the tape, but if you want to look at Kirby Sommers' channel, this is a good chance for you to subscribe to her channel and to watch her excellent talk. It's 2 hours and 28 minutes, I believe. Do that as soon as you get off this channel right here. I'm going to be wrapping it up in a few minutes here. But let me conclude by saying that Rosemary's Baby, 1968, it was a beta test for the decades to follow, right? And we've seen that decade by decade. This is the process. This is the beginning point, right? Where the psychosexual energy of young people, right? Teenagers, young adults, older people don't go to the movies that much. There's a certain even in the old days, it was typically children, kids, and teenagers, and then by the time you're in your mid-20s, 30s, you kind of age out of going to the movies. You're watching television or doing something else, and it's mostly kids there. That's why it's so noisy and unruly. And I was one of those kids in the theaters. So this is the beta test, Rosemary's Baby, where the psychosexual energy, right? This gets into the metaphysical part of it that aren't talked about in the film studies. This is where I look at other areas of research to put this analysis together. This is where the psychosexual energy is harvested from the prepubescent, the young adult film audience that represents the consumer for this type of entertainment, right? As it's moved from the theater to the television, the home, and now back to the private experience of the so-called smartphone, or more likely the iPad, right? That's how I understand Rosemary's Baby. That's how I understand Ira Levin. That's how I understand William Castle and Roman Polanski. Okay, as I wrap it up, let me bring you back to familiar ground again, right? Because the process of analysis is about drawing connections that don't seem to be connected. That's why I'm oftentimes being just dismissed as being crazy nut who's seeing paranoid patterns wherever they are. Well, I don't care. That was Professor Stan Su, as you recall from earlier talk, who said I was paranoid, and he's a guy who's based his career on engineering fear amongst a certain group. Asian American mental health is his particular scam, right? So let me bring you back. Many of us today, right here in the chat room, in the reviewing process, we are familiar with the occult obsession with what? Adrenochrome. And adrenochrome, as it was first put into the public awareness by Dr. Mengele, Hunter S. Thompson. He's another person that someone needs to go into. Maybe I'll attempt it. I can only do superficial. I'm trying to look at the overview, not just one person. But yeah, he's the representative of what Jan Wenner or other people refer to as the new journalism, because he published in Rolling Stone. I guess it was going globalist even in those early days. Now it's a total full-on globalist rag. But he called himself the gonzo journalist, right? And it appeared in 1971 as an article, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Now, it was a different byline. So those in the commentariat, you didn't catch me in a lie or a mistake. It went under the byline of Raoul Duke, but make no mistake, that was Hunter S. Thompson. And then that film years later was adapted into a film by Terry Gilliam, the guy that directed Brazil and all these other films about the New World Order and mind control. And I have mixed feelings about him. I don't know. That's another person that needs some scrutiny, looking at him through New World Order theory, not from film studies, which is pretty weak as far as I'm concerned. It was later adapted into a film, 1998, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And ever since then, all the people on the websites and the YouTube talk about adrenochrome this, adrenochrome that. So I will also allude to it to make people happy that you figured it out. But you haven't really, because you're thinking about it as a YouTube pop culture meme, whereas in truth, it's a control mechanism. How do I know this? Again, I look at the medical literature, the psychology, behavioral psychology articles on adrenochrome, and I have a whole file folder on it. And I'm telling you this because if you look at it through your search engine, whatever it might be, Google or DuckDuckGo, whatever it might be, they're going to say, oh, it was just an urban legend. It was just a New World Order theory. They try to dismiss it and minimize it. Anybody who even is interested in looking it up on a search engine, you're a fool, you're dumb, you're stupid. They're making fun of you, right? But the fact is that there is and I have it in my possession, and it'll go into a book or an article at one point. I have in my possession a whole trove of basic research, laboratory research that talks about adrenochrome. And I think from the benefit of my Patreon supporters, I'm going to post one or two of these articles just so you know, and I know you don't distrust me, but just to prove to you that I'm not just blowing smoke up your pant leg. All right, ladies and gentlemen, again, I promised you a return video visit to Kirby Sommers, and I ran out of time. But again, watch it on her channel, and maybe I'll get to a little bit. I had it all queued up and everything, but I just wanted to contextualize what her work means to me, what I draw from it, and also the work of Manny Grossman. So I apologize. This is really, as it turned out to be, an homage to their incredible research and for the incredible researchers that are now awakening. There's a sleeping giant awakening. And as an educator, that's what I've always tried to do, is to mobilize the dormant energies in people and to make people who don't normally see themselves as being contributing to anything. Oh, I've just heard an urban legend. No, you just didn't hear an urban legend from some crazy person called a caveman, or your crazy aunt living in the attic. That's local knowledge. That's community knowledge. It's valuable. Listen to yourself, listen to them, and make history. That's the word for today. Local history, local knowledge makes history. The history of freedom, sovereignty. Yes, That's where it's at. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining me. Please share this widely. I want to get up to 10,000 subscribers so I can start enticing big time authors into this channel who otherwise, this guy's nothing. He's he's got 8,000 subscribers. He can't be any good. Never mind. All right. Thank you very much. Bye bye. See you next time.